moderate such an important topic of women's sports leadership. Actually, just last night, I was watching ESPN Films, the documentary 144. I don't know if anyone saw it, but about the WNBA bubble. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It was really inspiring to see all of those powerful women fighting for social justice, gender equality. I think a lot of the things that relate to what we'll be talking about today. But speaking of powerful women, I am very excited to be here today with this group of women, all very talented in their fields, and I'm really excited to hear what you all have to say. So I figured to get things started, let's just go around. If everyone could just introduce themselves, a little bit about their role, and we'll start there. Shawna, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Thank you, Stacie. I'm so excited to be here and with such amazing women. I'm Shawna Burtscher. I head up sponsorship and experiential marketing at Audi of America, and have spent my entire career in sports and entertainment marketing for brands like General Motors and Miller Brewing Company, MasterCard. So very excited today and to share some insights.
Kerry, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Really excited to connect with everyone today and be a part of this panel. I'm Kerry Scalora. I lead Michelob Ultra Sports Marketing at Anheuser-Busch. I have had a few roles in the sports industry, starting out with Fox Sports, then Major League Soccer, UFC, and now I'm on the brand side.
Great. Bridget?
Hi guys, I'm Bridget Sponsky. I run brand strategy, sports and sponsorship marketing at Ally. I've been here for 13 years. I came over from the advertising agency side with a history in sports and entertainment multi-platform initiatives to rebrand the company from GMAC over to Ally, and have been with it since and watched it grow. So excited to be here today.
Great, thanks. Dana?
Hi, excited to be here. So my career is more on the business development side than the branding side, but I have a lot of years in the sports industry, mainly coming from the production and the sports tech side of everything, and working for Intel Sports, currently working with all our European football partners.
Great. Marissa?
Yeah, so Marissa Westlow, I'm Director of Sponsorships at Verizon. I oversee our music vertical as well as a handful of our sports verticals, including soccer. I've been at Verizon for about 2 years now. It's gone rather quickly during the pandemic. I've spent most of my career in sports, probably about 20 years, mostly on the agency side, all the big agencies, and excited to be here.
Great, it's great to have you guys here. So let's dive in. I figured we'd just start off a little personal and get warmed up. I know for me, growing up watching soccer, I always was really inspired by the women's national team. But I'd love to hear from some of you growing up, who were your favorite athletes?
I'll start. I'll start.
Marissa.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head for me because I was a huge former soccer player and a huge fan of the women's national team in the 90s. And of course the 1999 team. So the entire team I was a fan of: Michelle Akers, Mia Hamm, Julie Foudy, Christine Lilly. Those guys were my role models. So yeah, I followed them a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, Marissa, huge fan of them. I also was like any big Olympic sport, Mary Lou Retton I loved, Debbie Thomas, the ice skater. I was a huge Tigers fan growing up too, so Kirk Gibson, but I played a lot of sports growing up. So I feel like anybody that was around me that was amazing, whether it's BMX or gymnastics or softball, I was a huge fan of my competitors that I just emulated as well when I was young. So it was a good environment to grow up and be in awe of so many people.
Yeah, I'm happy to add to that. So I grew up in London actually, and part of growing up there, my parents would take us, it was always a day trip to Wimbledon. So I grew up watching Martina Navratilova, who to me was just amazing, and then Steffi Graf. So I actually got into the women's soccer a little later. Once the 90s hit, I think that World Cup in 99 really was a huge boost for women's soccer. But growing up as a sports fan, watching every sport possible. I came from a family who just loved watching sports, and we would do that as a family activity. My father has only daughters, but he took us to games and we would watch it on TV together, and we all grew up loving sports.
Similar to me.
It's funny, Shawna and I think share a similar spirit. Kirk Gibson was a big one for me. He was like the Detroit Tigers guy. In fact, I'd wear my softball hat really low like him, so I got the nickname Gibby my whole entire childhood. But really, you know, I love the powerhouses of the 92, 96 Olympics team, the gymnastics team, Shannon Miller, Dominique Dawes, Kim Zmestal. I think just as a young girl, like those girls were my age doing really extraordinary things that I was studying. And I think from not only a physical perspective, but what enamored me the most with that was like the grace that they competed with, and their focus and their awareness and the player coach interaction just fascinated me.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's great to see such a nice mix of athletes across all the sports. So that brings me to my next question. I did a little research on you guys, obviously. I learned that a few of you played on your college soccer teams. So I was wondering, how have your personal interest in sports shaped your professional work in sponsorships and sports media? Anyone wants to take that one?
I'll go first, Stacie. You're right. I played soccer in college at Penn. I'm officially a has-been. I'm a little washed up in my pickup leagues, but you know, for me, sports was always a part of my lifestyle and wasn't something that I could see myself giving up once I graduated. And so I knew that a career in sports was going to be the path that I was on. And so not only did I transition into being a sports professional, but I also learned a ton from my soccer career. And the skills that I learned became the foundation for my current professional journey to date. So hard work, how to be a team player, motivation, competition, and most important of all, resiliency too. So I feel as though all of those attributes that I learned being a collegiate soccer player, they've been immensely helpful with building the foundation for my career. And I think we all know that the sports business is super challenging, and it's a tough one to break into too, because the pipeline of talent is pretty vast. But I firmly believe that, you know, not just my passion for sports, but the attributes that I learned in the formative years throughout my, you know, collegiate career propelled me into being where I am today, and continuing to learn and grow from it too.
Yeah, I would say very similar, Kerry. For me, I grew up playing soccer. I played basketball and softball. I'm a horrible basketball player, but I managed to make it through high school. And then I was a walk-on at University of Miami and played a year, but I didn't go to school for athletics. And I was a really shy kid, and I agree, like sports taught me a lot and helped develop me as a person. And so there was a point in time where I realized I'm not going to go pro in soccer. And playing in college was a great experience. So how do I make a career out of being in sports? And so I started in college early on. I majored in marketing, minored in sports management, and started internships, just getting my foot in the door, because I still wanted to be around the industry because of, I guess, how appreciative I was in terms of how it developed me. And I completely agree. All of those things that you learn, teamwork, commitment, discipline, dedication, leadership, all of that stuff still applies to, I think, what we do now. And so it's been a good transition. Yeah.
Great. I love it. So focusing more a little bit on the business side of things, I'd be interested to hear from some of you, how are your companies furthering their brand goals through working with sports teams and athletes?
Do you want me to take that one first? You know, I think to be a brand that is talked about, to be a brand that's famous, to be a brand that's loved, you have to be in culture. You have to live in culture, and sports and athletes, I think their culture. You know, athletes are using their social platforms to support social causes. You know, fans are supporting brands that are joining in these athletes, and organizations that are expressing their values on social media. And I think at Ally, you know, our values are the most important part of our company, and they're all rooted in doing what's right. And the customer is at the center of every single thing that we do. And we have this firm belief that the diversity of thought is critical to progression and success. And in the end, I mean, we believe in deeds and not just words. And that values-based spirit is really how we approach our alignments in sports. We're very purposeful in the sponsorships that we have. and that they align with those values and that they have a voice in culture. You know, the fan and the athlete are at the center of every single thing that we do. How are we an ally to them, to the league, to the communities that we all serve? So when we talk about furthering our business goals, you know, disrupting the idea of traditional sports sponsorship has really helped us to connect to new audiences through different avenues of passion points. Whether those passion points around the athlete or the sport itself in culture. So finding ways to leverage like Alex Bowman's love for animals or Jimmy Johnson's love of marathons to capture a whole new audience who maybe before hadn't even thought about, you know, watching a NASCAR race. I think, you know, letting purpose guide us in our sponsorship with the NWSL and a mission to help create that equitable playing field for women on and off the pitch. You know, Andrea Brimmer, who is our CMO, was on a little bit earlier, and she talked a lot about establishing an impact fund that would go directly to the players and unlock opportunity for growth, and amplifying those voices and stories of the athletes speaks so much to a much larger audience than even that goes beyond women's soccer fans. But I think, you know, for us, it's that disruptive approach just provides that runway to not only help build larger fan bases for the league or the team or the athletes, but for our brand. And for us, it's a way as a digital only bank to let consumers feel what it feels like to be an Ally customer.
Awesome. I'd love to build to that one too, if I could. So, you know, for Michelob Ultra, our brand purpose is to show consumers that living an active and balanced lifestyle doesn't need to be stressful. So since we're a low calorie beer, we lean into the sports space through our key passion points, golf, running, soccer, basketball, tennis, to show our brand. So we've partnered with several sports properties, the NBA, WNBA, PGA Tour, PGA of America, MLS, New York Roadrunners, Miami Open. I don't know how I'm remembering all these, but we do this to serve as a platform for us to tell our brand story and also make sure that our beer gets in the right consumers' hands. But what we've done, mainly from an athlete standpoint over the past year, has pretty much revolutionized our approach from an above the line marketing perspective. So when I came on a year ago, we started partnering with the best of the best athletes: Serena Williams, Anthony Davis, Peyton Manning, Alex Morgan, not cheap, by the way, to show consumers that these rock star athletes can kick, you know what, in their respective sport, but they can also have fun when they're off the field and when they're off the court. So if you saw our Super Bowl spot this past year, it shows Serena singing karaoke with her girlfriends, Peyton Manning playing darts in a bar with his buddies, Brooks Koepka having a water balloon fight with his fiance. And it's showing that these athletes aren't just happy because they win because they're happy people. So we've leaned into these big sporting moments and athletes to help us amplify our brand message and make it be that much more relatable, because consumers are aspiring to be these athletes. They look to them. So ultimately, we hope that that's how our brand ethos and message gets transferred onto them.
Great. Passion points really are so important in all this. Great. So, you know, as this is a panel on women's sports leadership, I think we would be remiss not to discuss the women's coaches and executives that are really blazing the trail out there. So how are sports leaders such as Kathy Engelbrecht of the WNBA, Val Ackerman, Commissioner of the Big East, Lisa Baird of the National Women's Soccer League, and Marlins GM Kim Eng, just to name a few, how are they changing what it means to be a woman in sports leadership?
So I'll start. I mean, I think they're helping to change the conversation, and I think debunk this myth that women are not qualified or don't have the capabilities to take on these roles. And I think that's important, and it's inspiring the next generation. I had an executive in a previous role say to me, you know, it's great that we have a female in this on the sports account. And I remember thinking at the time when he made this comment to me, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm here because I'm qualified, but you know, what is that statement really saying? And that statement, what is that statement implying? It's implying that it's an exception that females run sports accounts, that it's an exception that females run these roles. So the more we see these momentum of females taking these positions, which I'd love to continue to see, the more it's changing the conversation, where it becomes the norm. And in the future, we get to a point where, you know, this panel doesn't exist. It's just about leadership in sports, and there's natural representation across the board. I think that's the end goal.
Agreed. So I'd love to build on that a bit more. When we think of women in sports, you know, there's a lot of names, big names that come to mind. Megan Rapinoe, Crystal Dunn, Rose Lavelle, Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka, Elena Del Don. The list really goes on and on. All these women, tremendous athletes who have fought and continue to fight for the same treatment in the media, the same pay, and the same respect as their male counterparts. How do you guys think that sports provide a platform to raise issues around women's equality?
I'm happy to start here. I think there's two ways to look at it. One is all these, you know, amazing women athletes that you mentioned, they have such a great platform. So for when they voice something, it amplifies the message. And it also is up to us who are kind of, you know, behind the scenes. As much as my esteemed colleague on this panel, none of us have the same following as a Serena Williams or a Megan Rapinoe. And I think it's also up to us on the business side, the sponsorship side within sports, to create that same conversation so that the next time, the next woman who's up and coming doesn't get that comment that, you know, Marissa just mentioned. So I think it's a combination of using all the women with that visibility, all the athletes that have, to voice those, to show it, you know, this year with having women referees in the Super Bowl, women referees in soccer and European soccer, we're seeing more and more of that. So the more visibility we have that helps with the goal of women's equality, but also it's the behind the scenes on the business side that we also have that role to get that message, to be in those mentorship positions, to make sure that the new women that are up and coming within the business are working in a different environment. So it doesn't seem as odd that a woman is taking on a sports media account, or she's not the only one in the room, right? We would love to have a 50-50% of gender equality in the room. So nobody looks at it as, oh, this is strange. So it's both on the visibility and on the behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
I would just build on that. I think it's also, as Dana was saying, these women that are just using the opportunities that they have to talk about equality, not just about pay, but about treatment overall. I think I certainly point to Serena's time at the US Open and you know, the attention that she certainly brought by arguing a few of the umpires' decisions, and how she was treated in that situation compared to some male counterparts. How Naomi Osaka did bring other competitors up, you know, at the end of a match and very compassionately talked about how her competitor played. I think the more we see those opportunities and just showcase them as regular, normal behavior that can be the same for every single person, no matter who they are or where they're from, that starts to create equality in the space. I think those lines for me personally need to get a little bit blurrier between gender and people of color, and just see people and treat them all exactly the same. So I think the more that we see those opportunities, the more that people who do have a lot of followers and eyeballs on them are showing some of that vulnerability and compassion and just asking for equal treatment, I think helps give permission to all of us to do that, and hopefully becomes more of the norm that we see everywhere.
Agreed. Anyone else? Great. Moving on. You know, I think we mentioned this in the beginning, but you guys are really such a talented group of women, a real dream team, you could call it, of sports marketing. I'd really love to discuss all your roles a little bit in more detail. What I found interesting as we were all talking the other day was that all of you are women in sports leadership roles across marketing, sponsorships, beer, auto, tech, all traditional, real male-dominated industries. I'd love it if you guys could talk about your personal journeys and where you come from and how you've gotten here.
Sure. I also feel like this is like a personal hype squad that we have going on here, just like all this empowerment for women. I love it. Thank you, Stacie. But so for me, I started my career in sales with ad sales at Fox Sports and then sponsorship sales at MLS and then UFC. So not only was I a woman in sports, but if you see being a saleswoman in sports, excuse me, is fewer and far between. So then when I went to UFC, it was even fewer. But that being said, I've always made it just be a Kerry thing. And then I've counted on myself to just be able to put in the work to, make a name for myself. And so, the gender bias in sports, mainly in the sports industry, just motivates me just to work harder and stay more on top of my game. And, we're all athletes here in some way. So I'm a competitor at the end of the day. So competition always gets me going.
I think I can jump in. I have a pretty good story in that I just took a lot of risks, I have to say. I showed up one day, basically invited myself to have an internship with IMG at the time. And then my first job, I kind of did the same thing. As soon as I graduated from college, made back in those days, a lot of cold calls to see who was just hiring in sports sponsorship. And again, invited myself into an agency's office one day because I knew that they were hiring an entire new division and department. It was the first time that they were getting into sports marketing. And at that time, I had worked extensively in motorsports. And as a very young person, knew a lot because of just how much I had done, and realized that they didn't know anything about motorsport where they were. They were definitely stick and ball people. And not that I didn't know that. Also, I just spent a lot of time, and the reactions I was getting from people were more like, should I not know all of these things? That maybe there were some secrets, and was hired on the spot and in probably an elevated role than I would have had I just sent in a resume and gone through the process. And I think a lot of it was just my naivete at the time, for sure, and my passion to be there, but also I just knew what I knew. Was really exciting. And I would just say for anybody, it's like, just follow your intuition and don't be afraid to take risks. And if you're an expert in something, go ahead and showcase that you are. I also grew up in a very male-dominated family too, around a lot of sports. So it's, I think that helped me just feel a little bit more comfortable in those environments as well.
I love what you just said, Shawna. My start was similar in that I was still in college, and someone that I knew worked at the local TV station and was saying, look, they're looking for a part-time position, a PA, basically you're running around bringing water to the anchors. And I said, yes, of course. Who doesn't want to do that while they're in college? And then I just kind of worked my way through the TV station. It was a local sports TV station. And at some point realized that there is a glass ceiling for what I wanted to do in that locale, and looked at the industry and said, well, I really love the production side of it. I love the distribution side of it. There's all this up and coming technology that makes the sports experience more interesting. And as a sports fan, I have something to say in this space. And I think to both your points, Shawna and Kerry, it's like, you know what you love, just go for it. And so then I transitioned into working with sports tech companies and saying, look, I understand sports. I know I'm a fan, so I know what the fan is looking for, what the fan wants. I've also had this experience that I'm coming from the production side. So I understand the pain points that are in production. And so then what are the technologies that kind of make that best fit? And it was really just looking at the market, looking at those different companies and sending out my resume to everyone who I could. And, at the end of the day, you do find your that fit. And I think it's very true. All of us working in sports, we know that there is the competitive side of it. There is very much the belief in yourself. If you know what you know, then just, go for it. And, the famous saying of you're always going to miss a shot, but you can't stop taking that shot. And so just don't get discouraged and keep going, because if this is truly what you love, you will find it at the end. You will find that place that has that fit for you. You just need to kind of keep at it, as frustrating as it sometimes can be.
I love that.
Just to add a little bit too, from my perspective, when I came over to Ally, like, my job didn't exist. We were building a brand from the ground up, and I think I kind of had to kind of choose my own adventure in a way, and how do I make sure that I can prove the value of sponsorship to our marketing mix. And so that's been a journey I think we've taken here at Ally, and we're really starting to explode in the space right now. But kind of going back, I think you had asked, like, how did sports sort of shape your shape that journey? And I think even as from a leadership position, the way I think about our team is I think about it like a sports team. I just always kind of applied that mentality in every single thing that I've done. It's always been this sort of player coach or team mentality that we sort of approach every single day with. And as I think about the objectives that I have, which is of course elevating women and sponsoring women and making sure that our voices are heard and we're visible. I have some very powerful women on our team that are running, really big sports marketing platforms. And it makes me really proud, but I think it's a testament to what sports teaches you at a young age and what it means to be a teammate and what it means to play as a team.
Yeah, I just want to add back to what Dana was saying, and just in terms of, and Bridget, what you were talking to in terms of, I think what we're all saying is persistence, and these values we learn through sports and being a sports fan. I knew I wanted to get in the industry in college, and I had interned with Octagon and IMG, and I was like, I'm setting myself up to succeed after I graduate from college. And then sure enough, after college, I was looking for a job in the industry and could not get a job. And I ended up taking a position in media planning for a media agency. And so at the time I was thinking like, oh, this is a little bit of detour of what I want to do, but it ended up being one of the best experiences because a lot of what I learned about the media industry and just marketing communications overall actually helped me get a job at IMG. IMG ended up hiring me because they're like, oh, you have a media background. So that to me was a lesson early on of be persistent if you want to continue to pursue working in the industry, and sometimes these detours or taking risks, you actually learn more about yourself, but learn more in general that will benefit you in the long run. And I think now in terms of my career, I think a lot of people think about their career in a linear fashion, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I think of careers as a portfolio of work, and it doesn't need to be the next step. It could be I'm actually gonna transition into a new industry to learn more about that. So that was a big moment for me, and that impacted me. And then I've spent most of my time on the agency side. But in terms of sports being a male-dominated industry, I've always just kind of felt like, as a former athlete, I'm just going to put my head down and work my butt off, and that will pay off. I think I eventually learned to find my voice, and then it's not just about hard work, but to lean into being authentic and finding my own voice and finding my way. That was another big lesson, I think, in my career.
I think there's a lot of lessons there. Go ahead. I think it's great for anyone listening, and even myself, just to hear, some great advice here as you work your way up. Great. So I'd love to just switch gears a little. I was reading this study that I thought was interesting and I thought we could talk about. It was a recent study by USC and Purdue, and it found that while women make up 40% of women athletes, they only receive an average of 4 to 5% of media coverage on TV, online, and social media, which I found crazy. So are there any thoughts from you guys on how to change this lack of visibility?
You want me to start that one?
Yeah, tough one. Go ahead.
I mean, there's no doubt that media plays a huge role in how we see sports and who and what we value in sports. And if female athletes are seen and respected, culture will naturally follow. I think we're kind of living it a little bit in a way. It's with to live it. And, we're seeing more women athletes and former athletes and celebrities becoming team owners. What's happened with women investors and founders, like with Angel City and Kansas City, and the Marlins have their first female GM in the MLB. And, we're seeing sideline coaches in Tampa Bay. Like it's awesome to see this is really starting to take shape, but representation matters. And I think, the more we see it, the more we will believe it, and the more culture will receive it and follow it. And so I think, one, we've got to keep investing. I think we've got to invest in women and women athlete-owned media and business. We've got to invest in developing women in sports media, because when women are creating the content, the conversation around sports changes. And we've got to continue to invest in professional women's sports league expansion, which I know was a big driver for us in our NWSL partnership. But I'd also say commitment to more consistent coverage of women's sports will help audiences be able to have the opportunity to anticipate or even understand the strategies and like get to know the players and the teams, start to follow their storylines, build from those storylines from game to game. And I mean, that's the kind of content and that's the kind of emotional attachment that fan culture relies on. And so, you know, I think it's more than just the coverage of a big game or a big tournament. I think that's what builds an audience, is like having that consistency. So, you know, I think lastly, I mean, just keep encouraging our young girls to play. And I think the more we can keep encouraging our youth, the more they will change and they will push to make change.
Yeah, and you know, coming from more of the media side, I think there's, as Richard was saying, it's not only coverage of events, but there's storylines, right? And it's up to the media to cover those storylines, because each one of these teams, athletes, whoever it is, has a great story behind them, like every athlete does. And what we find is that, you know, there's kind of a peak towards usually an Olympics or World Cup or something where everybody, and then how do we maintain that throughout the 4 years that are in between these big events? And it is a work in progress. I do think that right now we're living in incredible times. You know, if you're looking at the domestic media rights deal in the UK that the Women's Super League just signed with Sky, which is, you know, one of the largest women's domestic league media rights contract ever. Right now, the WNBA with the Amazon. So I think we're in the process of there. We're still not where we need to be, but we're definitely better than where we were. And it's also up to us, you know, and the women on this panel, is that we know how hard it is to get these games on TV, and sometimes it's up to the sponsors to just, you know, to sponsor, to bring in those revenue streams to those leagues, to those teams, so that they are able to buy the best player, pay the big contracts. It's all one big piece of the puzzle. So everyone has a role to play in it. I definitely think we're on the right track. We're getting there. Sometimes, you know, as with every historical change, when you're in the process, it feels like it's moving too slow. But then if you're looking at it in hindsight, you're saying, wow, that happened pretty quickly. But I think that the data is out there. You know, look at 2019, the Women's World Cup. It had more ratings than anything. You know, the final was one of the best viewerships in the US, more than the men's. So it's time to get everyone on board, you know, our male allies within the media industry and the women who are working in that media industry, to show that there are fans out there. There is a desire to watch these games. So how do we get them on TV on a regular basis and in prime time too, right? It's not only get them on a service that nobody's watching, but let's make these national games. So it's up to all the different stakeholders to kind of, you know, get it going. And I think we're in the right direction. We're getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did want to get to this. So given the events of the last few years, you know, obviously it's been a crazy year with the pandemic, but also, you know, Me Too, and all of that. It's never been a better time to support women's sports and amplify messages around equality. You know, I think March Madness this year was a seminal moment for collegiate sports. This year's tournament really brought to light that disparity in treatment between men's and women's basketball, something that Title IX and the NCAA are supposed to really be preventing. So thinking to the future, what changes do you guys hope to see?
Oh, I can take that. Sorry, my in-breath made it seem that I was talking, I think. I think what Dana just said was actually very eloquent. And I think for me, all of this intertwines, right? We all can vote with our viewership and our dollars and where we're paying attention to, you know, content and who we follow. I think all of that's critical. For me, what's happened over the last few years, it seems like it's made people a little bit more vulnerable, definitely open to talking about things a bit more. I think that willingness to talk about these difficult subjects is also coming from them being a little bit fed up of just having enough. And I'm seeing more people support one another too. So not just the people that are the trailblazers that might be willing to speak up, people are now able to support them and willing to support them too. And I think they're a little less afraid of what that backlash becomes or being different, which personally I feel really excited about. I think if people can continue to be working in these vulnerable spaces, the more women that we see in leadership, the more decisions are going to be made, the more thought processes are going to change around things. And hopefully it's a domino effect of just getting to a place of equality, because everything has started to line up. And I think when people see other people leading with that kind of integrity, then they feel empowered to do so too. And I'm hopeful that that's the case going forward. Progress will continue to be made.
Yeah, and I think in addition, you brought up what happened with the NCAA, and I think this is something that had it happened 10 years ago, no one would have known about it. People who are working there, we know that the facilities are different, we know that the treatment is different, but the fact that nowadays a college athlete can post it on her social media, and then nobody said, oh, that's how it should be treated, right? It's like she shed a light on something, and I think there was a consensus that this is wrong, and that's already step number one. So where we do see all these disadvantages and where the treatment is wrong, shed a light on it to make those changes. We can't, and I think this is something that I'm encouraged by, sometimes social media is used for good. You can shed a light on that and make those changes, right? And it is, if you don't know about it, well, now you know about it. And so what are you going to do to make the change? And I think this is what's encouraging about these times, is that we have those pictures. You can't argue with them. And so the change will have to come.
Yeah, I'll only add that I completely agree with Shawna and Dana. There's this we need to keep the commitment to change and to close that gap. And I think, I'd like to see more female commissioners, more female coaches, more female referees. That representation matters. Again, to the point where we get to a place where it's an afterthought, that there's enough diversity in our industry. It's an afterthought. So, but there seems to be this wave, this momentum from brands, talent, players, organizations to really make an effort to make a real change in our industry. So that's been positive, but we've more to go.
I love, it's funny because you hear a lot of stories about, women athletes in particular. It's, they have to have another job, right? They've got to have a hustle or whatever it is that they've got to do to make sure that they're making their ends meet. And I think to get to a point where, women athletes can retire and confidently and securely, I think that's all of these deeds, all these actions will get us there at some point. But, it's a really interesting insight to hear that.
Absolutely. Well, as you guys have been talking, questions have been coming in, so I'd love to get to some of those with the time we have left. So one is, what ways is your brand working to stand out in the eye of the consumer?
I'll start with that one. So Intel Sports, we're creating a volumetric video, which is new immersive experiences. And it's backed by Intel, which is more known for a tech company, but we really are looking at how to enhance the fan experience, how to really create this new tech, this new way of engaging with content, enjoying the content, showing you the new perspectives of the game. And so really, it is all about the storytelling and the fan experience, especially during, we saw during this year how important it is for the fans sitting at home to feel as if they're on the field. And so this is very much of the Intel TrueView belief is that this is, the power of technology is what's going to change how we experience the games.
I agree, Dana. I think it's funny, going through 2020 and, having to pivot on a dime and shifting from an in-person experience to a completely virtual experience. I mean, the reality is like a lot of what we did was not for nothing. I mean, it's a lot of those virtual experiences, a lot of the new technology that we found to deliver more of an in-person fan experience. I mean, even in some of our properties, I mean, we worked, just an example outside of sports, but we worked with iHeartMedia, and we were able to bring, live concerts to people in their homes, or to healthcare workers that were in the hospitals, or to people getting better who were sick. And like that kind of stuff isn't possible, all the time in person. And, it just helped us kind of bring that scale to a whole nother level. And so I do think, like, to your point, a lot of what we did from a pivot standpoint to pull more technology, to pull more, digital forward thinking ahead is going to stick. And I think it's going to continue to game change how we activate around our sports platforms.
And I think, Bridget, what you're saying just about tech and the past year, for us, we work to address a tension that consumers are feeling, and we want to make sure that our marketing needs are satisfying those tensions. So for the lack of having fans in arena, what we put on with the NBA was Michelob Ultra courtside. So having those virtual fan boards with Microsoft technology where people would go in and you would actually feel like you were sitting courtside, like as a fan, but also the athletes, when they came back into the arena, they had fans present too. So for us, addressing that tension, making sure that fans have athletes and athletes have fans as well, but also at the same point for us to, stand out is these big media drivers that get a ton of attention. So, the past year of 2020 has been a dynamic, but has brought, immense learnings for us to figure out how to pivot and adapt and how to reach our consumers in different and engaging ways, and leaning more so into tech, I think, than really ever before.
Yeah, I would just add, same thing for Verizon. We've spent the last 2 years deploying 5G across a number of stadiums and arenas. And so the priority for us is innovating with our partners like the NFL, the NHL, NBA teams, to showcase the power of 5G and build different experiences for fans in these arenas through multi-view experiences or AR, to really prove out, why does 5G matter, and as that's the next game-changing innovation, but why does that matter to a sports fan? So that's been our main focus from a sponsorship standpoint.
Great. So then another question, how are your companies empowering young people, particularly women, to enter and play sports, be professional athletes, or be leaders in sports and sports marketing?
We're doing a lot in the equality space. I would have to say we do less in sports specifically because we just don't have a lot of sport properties. We are working with Major League Soccer on a huge initiative around their academy program and making that much more inclusive on how they're recruiting into those academy programs. We're hopeful that MLS Next is going to have girls programming soon, which is something that we're really excited about. We work a lot in the culinary space and in film, where women are tremendously underrepresented also, to give opportunities in sponsorships and mentorships, job placements. So it's a really hot topic for us, actually, and something that we've been working on for about the last 5 years. And it's really, really fulfilling to see the progress that is being made in those. And as a big brand, we have the ability to showcase their stories and leverage the power and the reach that we have to help move all of that forward and just progress diversity and inclusion holistically in every industry is what we're trying to do.
Or at Anheuser-Busch, we actually, it's vice versa for us. So we have a partnership with the NWSL, obviously, and we have an internship program that takes place for them every year. So it's a handful of athletes that are on the brink of retiring. Bridget, to your point, like what is going to happen to these athletes after they retire? Well, they'll do a rotational program in our marketing department to see of different business areas that they could get into in marketing when they retire. And that's an annual program that we run, and the athletes have great visibility. You know, it's kind of like a star-studded appeal when they're on the floor with us, but they have great visibility into just learning the different verticals that we have as part of our business, and to plan for, you know, when they eventually have to hang up their cleats, getting into the business world, what that looks like. And an easy enough transition for them is to get into sports marketing, which is why we have the program that we have.
Great. What are some of the challenges you faced as women in sports media? Not sure anyone.
I'll take that one. I think so. I started out as a sports reporter producer, and spending time in various locker rooms has its own challenges in terms of just being taken seriously. You do need to overcome that. And I found the way to do it is just, you have to stay as professional as you can and prove yourself. And once you do that, I found that, you know, after the initial response to what are you doing in this locker room, and then you ask a good question, they know that you know what you're talking about, and then the next time they're not going to ask that question because they know that. So that was, I think, the initial challenge, you know. And coming out of college, it wasn't easy, but I think we talked about it before. Just keep going, and in some form or other, I think it's come across in various rooms, in various settings. Sometimes this, especially the sports media, is still traditional in some ways, but those are the main challenges. It's just, you know, how do you get taken seriously? And the way to answer that is just be as professional as you can. And once that initial shock and awe is over, you will be taken seriously.
Like it. I think we have time for one more. So there's been a lot, but I'll choose. How do you guys approach emerging media channels, and how do they factor into your overall strategy?
We've, in Major League Soccer, we've actually started to talk to some new media channels and players in the industry. We've created our own content series and kind of gone to an RFP with all of these media channels to see where is the best place for us to make our mark. So I think it's a little bit of trial and error, but just being open to taking some of those risks, but also knowing from a research perspective, where are people tuning in, how are they leveraging it, and knowing the best way that you can approach it. It's also a lot of test and learn as we do approach these things, and seeing how we can leverage them to the best of our ability. But it's been a lot of just risk and finding ways that we can be really innovative and progressive in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I would say too, like for, you know, as we think about like, how do we kind of get out of the sea of sameness, right? With some of the traditional channels, is how can we take a lot of the alignments that we have, the ambassadors that we have, you know, the influencers that we have, and cross collaborate, right? Create unique dynamics with each other, and it kind of opens up this whole new world of storytelling. And so we've been leveraging strategies like that, not only in sports marketing, but for brand marketing as well. And then, you know, I would say too, like the content is booming right now. I mean, everybody is just they're craving content. And I think as we start to think about where do we invest in, like, and how do we leverage storytelling and content too, it kind of goes back to my earlier point of thinking about how are we investing in women-owned content platforms? How are we investing in minority-owned content platforms, and making sure that we're